call up the store. I say, am I the only writer that calls up the store and says, can I come? It's interesting that Jan would begin with the quote from Emerson, because I stayed up almost all night last night reading Nell Painter's, Urban Painter's new book, The History of White People, and one of the things that was shattered for me was she put Emerson right there in the middle of the development of a kind of white supremacist way of thinking about race. And that was really sad for me, you know. It's always sad, isn't it, when we find that writers we care about are homophobic or racist, and it's always a challenge to how do we hold on to that aspect of a writer or a thinker that we really care about, as we also hold negative information about them. And the book I wanted to read from, it's okay for her to talk a little bit, because I think it's not exciting for her necessarily to be here with Bill. And to move around a little bit, you know. I came a few months ago, was it? And I was going to read from this book, but we couldn't get copies. This was my new book, Teaching Critical Thinking, Practical Wisdom. And it's slightly different from my other books. With the other two teaching books, Teaching to Transgress and Teaching Community, one of the things, people kept asking me questions. So I collected all the different questions. And this book is like 50 questions and the short answers that I wrote to them, thinking about Emerson and thinking about all of us, whether it's Shakespeare or, you know, I always, with my sister who's lesbian, I always feel really bad when I'm reading a book and I think it's really great. And then I come to some sicko part about lesbians and gays. I always think that, you know, because I read a lot of spirituality books, especially I find like, I'll be reading a Christian book, you know, and they'll be talking about the sky. And then all of a sudden it'll be, and homosexuals, you know, like, rot in hell. And we think, where did that come from? We were musing about the sky. I constantly think that we need some psychoanalyst to try to look at what is it about that particular issue that in so many popular Christian writers, it pops up again out of nowhere that they need to kind of reproduce a kind of message of hate. It's very interesting to me because I'm a fanatical reader of many things, and I do read a lot of spirituality writing because I like to read what masses of people are reading a lot of times to see, you know, to think you're reading a book, you know, that millions of people, I mean, I hated his book, Steve Harvey, but, you know, what was it, talk like a lady, think like a man, or something like that. But like, I read it too, because I had the privilege of being here with one of my very best friends, April, when I came out of the little apartheid racism of my hometown at 17 years old. I went to a women's college with all the white girls who were not particularly nice to me. And there was this little Czechoslovakian immigrant girl who was also working class. And that was one of the things that bound us together, our understanding of what it was to be working class in this nation and to be allowed to come to schools. And so here we are, 40 years later, still together, still exploring the interstices of being black and white and bonding in our nation. My favorite card game in childhood was authors. Every card had a picture of a writer. And I never reflected on the fact that they were all white. They were not all male. My beloved Emily Dickinson was included. Each writer was important to me based on whether I found their work compelling. Dickinson was my very favorite, and after her, Emerson, Thoreau, and Hawthorne. Growing up in the segregated world of the South, attending what the white folks called colored schools, I didn't associate race with learning. I didn't know there was such a thing as a canon composed of the writers Western culture deemed great. Every smart person in my world, every teacher was black. They taught me the works of these writers whose words and ideas mattered so much to me in life. Finding an alternative sense of self and identity in the world of books as a girl, I didn't think about race and writing. In my teens, I went in search of black writers. By then, schools were integrated. Black children were bused across town into a world of whiteness that did not want us, that had never included us. Determined to be a writer, I wanted to read the books written by black writers. White teachers with no overt racist intentions assured me that very few black folks had written books, and that what they had written was just not good enough to be read or taught in schools. Growing up in racial apartheid, one learns a healthy skepticism in relationship to dominator culture. Black children then were taught early on not to trust white people and their perspective on the world. They were not concerned with our well-being, with our intellect. Searching for black writers on my own, I found us. I found James Weldon Johnson, Langston Hughes, Georgia Douglas Johnson, and many more. I found a world of poetry written by black folks that was just as wonderful, just as compelling as the work of my beloved Emily Dickinson. The only canons I formed in my mind were filled with the writers whom I felt as soul-inspiring residents, the writers whose works were great to me because they gave me words, wisdom, and visions powerful enough to transform me and my world.